Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, and Rabbi Yosef HaLevi Weinberg Olav Shalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zevi Cheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'edich Yomim V'Shonim Tevis for many long, healthy years. Also in schus of our soldiers standing on the front lines, protecting and defending our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. May Hashem protect them all and finish total nitzachon with the least amount of pain and agmas nefesh. Only good news from now on, forever and ever. So we are at the conclusion of chapter 16, Perek Tazayin in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe, in an inimitable style, has been giving us and dissecting the very anatomy of the human processes necessary to transform ourselves, elevate our state of consciousness and our emotional states. In other words, not just to grow as we grow naturally, but to work on ourselves. Like he said right at the beginning of the chapter, the Klal Gadol, the fundamental principle of a Beinni, not just that there's a behavioral control, that you actually achieve self-mastery. You become a greater person. And how we do that is why we're given a mind and a heart. The mind, we have the capacity, our desire to concentrate, to focus, to contemplate on godliness, which in turn will give birth to emotions of love and reverence of God. Then came the second klal, and that is that even if we cannot fully generate and ignite a passionate, fiery love, a person should not feel down. Why? Because the fact is, through our contemplation and the emotional, we achieve a level that he calls a form of appreciation. You may not have the passion, but you've come to a point where you appreciate. You feel it worthy and appropriate to love God. And that, as he said, has a similarity to the midas bizgalus libei. So even if a person ein yad sichle v'ruchi b'nos maseges lehil avos Hashem bizgalus libei, that it should burn with a fire, nevertheless, he feels it appropriate and therefore appropriate and fitting, and that is what's causing him to do Torah mitzvahs. In other words, he's not doing Torah mitzvahs simply because it's nature or second nature, but it's due to that effort. So even if he did not create a full-blown emotion, these it serves like wings that help elevate him. As if. You could say, how could that be? So he brought the raya that this is what Chazal tell us. What's the meaning of that? Machshava teva is this talumis libe, is that the mind is discerning and appreciating, and the heart is sensing that this is valuable for me, which is a big achievement, because before that contemplation and emotional reaction, we didn't know that or feel that. So that God rewards with mitzarfa lamaisa, that even if it doesn't come into a fiery passion, and it only remains in the mind, and so-called talimus libe, and the more a more concealed, muted form of emotion, which is Govid Darchem Lamay Lamay B'chinas HaMaisa, because it remained mostly Moyach and Lev. Not like his Galus Libe. If it's a passionate love, that is an interface and directly impacts actions. You see, when a person is passionately in love with something, his actions are infused with that love. Here you don't have that infusion. So the Eibishter fills in that gap. So even though Yef Shalom Slabish B'chinas Mais HaMitzvahs, because it hasn't yet developed that full, powerful passion, so the Eibishter takes care. Liaslam b'chinas meichel l'chayis l'alesim im loisha Kadosh Baruch Hu mitzafen u'mechabem b'chinas ha'maisa. So the Eibishter connects it and makes that attachment, which means that we have to say that what he said earlier, that tfuna zu mislabeshes ma'isa dibur machshava, is with the Eibishter mitzarfa l'maisa. But you can't say it's only God doing it, because the fact is you have come to appreciate with your mind and with your heart. And that's why he said that Hoyel v'tfuna zu shemechi, that's what brought him to do Torah mitzvahs. V'lulei she'im is beina b'tfuna zu lo ha'esik b'hem klal. He would have just then follow his natural tzarchei gufe, his natural self, which also includes the natural, let's say, inclination to learn Torah. But here he's gone further than that, because he's made that effort. So the human being has done his part, and the Eibishter then does his part and connects it as if, and that's the addition that happens here. But the Eibishter is doing, he's filling in that gap. The gap between what? Between passionate love, which is his galus libe, and when it's talumis libe, the Eibishter makes sure to fill that in, and mitzarfa l'maisa. And it serves as wings that infuse your maisa with a passion. So in addition to whatever it is that you came to, that you appreciate, and you feel appropriate, and you feel it's important and worthy of loving God, the Eibishter actually adds the mitzarfa l'maisa. And in the footnote, in the Haggadah, the Alter Rebbe added how it is in the Sfiras L'mayla, that at times you have tfuna, tfuna is this level of the emotional result of an intellectual contemplation. That's why tfuna is called ben ubas. Tfuna is the letters ben ubas. But since it's still talumis libe, that's why tfuna sometimes goes down and becomes meichin of malchus, the Zohar Ampin. So how does that make that leap? That's through the mitzarfa l'maisa. As we discussed in the previous class. So it bypasses the midas of Zoh and goes straight into Malchus. That's the same idea. Machshava Teva, that's not gone into a passionate love, but is galus libe, is bypassing and going into Malchus. And the koyach of that comes from the Eibishter. That's mitzarfa l'maisa. Okay. Now let's learn the end of Tanya. The end of this Perek in Tanya, I should say. Perek Tazayin. But to go, before we read inside, let's review a few key points, and especially things that the Alter Rebbe discusses later as he refers to chapter 39 and 40 in Tanya. He'll elaborate. But it's already connected here, and the Alter Rebbe brings it here. So what do we have here? So far we've established like this. You have a human being that in chapter 15, that simply naturally, what he called lo yavodai, it's natural to him. He loves to learn. Or his personality is an introverted one. Or he's someone that's cold-blooded, so he doesn't have the taivas naturally, without work. So he's a beinani because b'poel mamish, his thought, speech, and action are under control, but it's not coming through work, through effort. What's Eved Elikim? He explained. Someone that goes beyond his natural tendency. Doesn't just learn and review his learning 100 times, but he goes the 101 time. He also gave another example, another effort, that the effort is that you're actually working on stimulating the natural love that you have for the Eibishter. Let's just read inside because it's going to be relevant to what we learn here. So he said that, either, again, he goes beyond this Teva Regilis, and I should also add, not just Teva Regilis, there's also Teva Sheni, which means a person can train himself, and this becomes his habit or routine, but that too is Teva. So going beyond that requires Aveda, and how do you go about that? Requires Eizbanus B'Gedulas Hashem B'Meichei, which will ultimately affect also his emotions. Another way is remember, every person naturally has a natural love to God. But that too is part of the nature. That's not Aveda. But there's an Aveda where a person stimulates that Ava Mesuteres. That's not like the first level. The first level is much stronger because the first level is completely generated by you. That's real Aveda. You created it. You've contemplated it, and you've expressed it and has given birth to a midah, to emotions, like he explains in chapter 3 in Tanya. Obviously, the natural love is also somewhat affected, even though he doesn't discuss that. But there's another way, where you're not generating completely through your contemplation. You're actually taking that natural love, let's say the natural love you have to God, and you me'ated it. He says, "Shezru nikra gam ken aveda," because he's done something to me'ated this ava mesoteres. Mashenkin kishen le'malchama klal. If there's no malchama at all, there's no battle at all, that's called lo yavodai. So in aveda itself, two ways. One is you generate it, and that's the most powerful because then it's really your work. The meichin and the midas, or you me'ated the natural ava. In chapter 16, he went on to say that when you talk about the first approach, that you generate it all. It's coming from your contemplation, and it's awakening an emotion. But what happens in a scenario that doesn't really get the Ava Bizgalus Libe, like he said, but it's only Betalumis Libe. So you've made your effort, and that's where we need that additional element that we say that Kosh Baruch Hu Mitzarfa Lamaisa, that the Eibishter adds, and therefore compensates, and it becomes like it was your emotion, but it's through your effort. How about the work that you do in being awakening your own personal, natural love? So here's what the Alter Rebbe is now going to address, and he's going to bring a new concept that we haven't learned yet, and that is the concept of D'chila Rechima Sichlim, and there's D'chila Rechima Tivim. So D'chila Rechima Sichlim is what is generated through our effort. Meaning Sichlim, you've contemplated, you've worked on yourself, and you contemplated on godliness, and it's given birth, first in your mind, like the Tfuna, and then in actual emotions. And that's considered the highest level of Aveda. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe Rashab in Kuntres Aveda says that level is even higher than Ava Bizgalus Libe, than Ava Yirsha Bizgalus Halev. That's explained in chapter 16. But Al Kaponim, it's a high level. Then there's D'chila Rechima Tivim. That goes back to the natural love and reverence that every Yid has to the Eibishter. But there too, could be lo yavada by not doing anything and it's just there and remains dormant, or you do something to awaken it. And Alter Rebbe is now going to bring that into the context of Mitzarfa Lamaisa, how that works. One more introduction, and then we'll learn inside, in the distinction. You're familiar, of course, we've learned earlier in Tanya about the Elamis, called the Elamis Atzilas Bri Yetzir Asiya. And we explained at length in the earlier chapters, these are not worlds, they're not planets, they're dimensions. Actually, you can say they're four states of consciousness, four states of divine consciousness, with Atzilus obviously being something only consumed, that's Kuli Elokus. It's a person who's completely like a Merkava Seina and a Merkava, 24/7, a chariot, a channel for godliness. Elama Achdus. Bria is already, there's an independent ego, an independent entity. Let's call it ego. It doesn't mean ego as in going against God, but it means there is an independent entity, but it's bottled to the Eibishter. So it's still a high level, not quite like Atzilus. That's why you don't say Iyu v'chayu ichad, Iyu v'gamu ichad, which means that the Edison and Kalim and everything are completely subsumed in the divine. A difference, for example, would be, the story goes about the Alter Rebbe and Rab Hillel. So it says the Alter Rebbe, before Shabbos, would drowse off because he was bedugma l'mayla. It's a time in l'mayla ruchnius. So in the state of Atzilus, where there's durmita de Zoh. Zoh goes into a type of comatose state before the new Eir that comes in for Shabbos. And Alter Rebbe was a lion, so he would fall asleep for a short period. Rab Hillel Paritcher was not on that level, but he knew about it, so he would go take a nap. So one, it comes natural because he's just a seamless flow and channel of that divine. And his Margish, it feels it. Rab Hillel is already, you could say, similar more to Bria. It's a line, but it's through effort. Then you have Yetzirah and Asiyah. What is the difference between Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah? So Bria is a level of meichin. You contemplate on something. You contemplate on it, and therefore it's a level of meichin. Binam, it says, in Mekanana B'Kursaya. Ima Mekanana B'Kursaya. Because Elam HaBriya is an Elam of meichin. D'chila v'rechim sichlim. Elam HaYetzirah is an Elam of midas. D'chila v'rechim tivim. And Elam HaSiyah is behavioral. So now let's go back to the language that the Alter Rebbe said. Machshava Teva, he said, is what? Is not D'chila v'rechim sichlim, as in there's a galus libe that he completely feels it in his heart. That's the level of Bria. The level of Yetzirah is that you have midas. Now the midas could be either they're like talumis libe, or, as we'll learn shortly, they're the natural love that we have for Hashem. And that exists even without the mitzvah for l'maisa. Then there's Asiyah itself, it's just simply behavioral of Asiyah. What we're going to learn is that when the Eibush says mitzvah for l'maisa, is that when you apply yourself, and even though you don't, you with your mind and your emotions, and even though you don't create a fiery, passionate emotion, the Eibush, in other words, you have a contemplation, but it hasn't grown into a full passionate emotion. The Eibush will bridge the two. He'll take your machshava and bridge it with your maisa. What would be if you didn't do that? It still doesn't mean that you haven't achieved anything. That's what the Alter Rebbe wants to add now. Because after what we learned, you could say, okay, 1 second. You told me in Klal Godel, the second Klal Godel, that even if a person in Yodei Masagas, he can't awaken a full-blown emotion, and it's only an element of he appreciates, he recognizes it's worthy to love God. But you said Ki'ilu as if it's Bizgalus Libre. And you explained why is it Ki'ilu? Because the Eibush is Mitzar for Lamaisa. Let's say the Eibush would not be Mitzar. What is your actions worth? What is your contemplation and emotion worth if it didn't create a full-blown emotion? So with God's effort, God's contribution, compensating, it creates that whole passion like the wings. What about if it didn't have the Mitzvah for the Ma'aseh? The Alter Rebbe comes to explain, even if it didn't have it, it's still, there's an achievement here over Lo Yavodai. It's not like you didn't do anything, because you did work hard. You're just not able to achieve that level, like he explained in the first Hagah, because a person has not reached that level of maturity, not due to lack of Aveda, because he's simply not on that level. As we learned in the first Hagah, in the Tanya, where he said that that is due to the fact he's not on that level. So Alter Rebbe is going to explain now, nevertheless, there's much that's accomplished through your own effort, and then we have the mitzarfa, that the Eibush to machshava te mitzarfa l'maisa. So let's learn now, and we'll understand. So when we talk about the worlds, we talk about when we're mila through our mitzvahs, through our actions, we elevate something to atzilus, to bri, yetzirah, asiyah, depending on the level. All depends on your work. How high are you elevating it? So if you can reach a level of tchila rechim sichlim, to the point of ava bizgalus libe, you feel it, So you've elevated it to the highest level on your own. Even if you can't elevate it to that level of Bria, and you only elevate it to Yetzirah, it's still an achievement. But with the Eibush that he takes what you've elevated to Yetzirah, which is more of the midas that are not Bizgalas Libe, or the natural love, and the Eibush can elevate it to Bria, but that doesn't mean you haven't elevated to Yetzirah. That's what he's going to explain now. Because it's higher than Asiyah. Because it's not just action, it's not just behavioral, you have put effort in. So now we have it also structured in the level of the worlds. So he says like this now, Ach, Tziruv Zeh, this tziruf but this attachment, what attachment are we talking about? HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maisa. So we talked about that he connects, he attaches your machshava tevi, your effort with your mind, but it's still ava musateres in your mind. And additionally, the talumis libe, the Eibishter attaches it and compensates, connects it to Maisa, and makes it as if you achieve that emotions through yourself. The Eibishter is now adding that element. So it says this tziruf, that the Eibishter, Kodesh Baruch Hu, the tzaref, is one that creates this tziruf. And he joins and connects your effort, your mind, and your emotions. Despite it not being fully blown passionate emotion, he connects it to actions. Well, it's not rak, it's as if we add the word rak. Who kedei lahalis ma'isa mitzvus ve'esek ha'teira nasma de machshava teva now ad elam abriya. It's in order. What is the process? What is the Eibishter doing? Now that we're talking about it in the states of consciousness of the worlds, he's elevating your maisa, your mitzvah acts. He said, maisa mitzvahs ve'esek ha'teira, which were brought about hanasma de machshava teva hanal. Because we're not just talking about behavioral because you're naturally that way. We're talking about it came through your contemplation and as much as possible some emotional reaction. That you at least appreciate ye'osa, that it's worthy of loving. That it has achieved. Like we said before, because without this, his bonus, without this tfuna, he said before, you would not have been doing the mitzvahs. So in other words, this was generated by you. The Eibishter then comes and takes what was generated, even though it didn't reach the highest level of Bria, he's elevating ad elam abriya. What's the achievement of elam abriya? So elam abriya, he says, is like this. Mokem, that's the place, that's the dimension that we reach. Mokem aliyas ha'teira v'ha'mitzvahs hanasma yidei tchila v'rechim ha'sichlim asher b'izgalus libei. Mamish. That world of Bria is the place where Torah mitzvahs ascend when they're carried out how? Through intellectually generated love and reverence, which is real and tangible in your heart. We're talking about that highest level. That of the person who's able to achieve that can achieve that without the Eibishter necessarily compensating. But like we said, we're talking about someone that we need that compensation. So what the Eibishter is doing is taking your Torah mitzvahs. You haven't been able to achieve on your own that type of passion for it. In other words, doing the mitzvahs is literally feeling the passion. So the Eibishter elevates it to the world of Bria. Okay? But even without it, don't think that nothing was accomplished. Because remember, the Eibishter is taking your machshava teva and attaching it. It's not the Eibishter is creating the machshava teva. Aval b'lavochi. Meaning, even the Eibishter did not make this attachment, this connection. But even without this connection, your effort still elevates your Torah mitzvahs to the world of Yetzirah. Yetzirah is the world of emotions. Zoh, mekanano, b'Yetzirah. And so how's that? So before we learn, that's because it's betalumis libe. You have some emotional reaction, but he's adding now something. Through awakening the natural dormant reverence and love found from birth in the heart of every Jew. So there's an additional element here. Now, why does he bring that here? Till now he was saying you don't achieve emotional passion, but you achieve at least an emotional reaction of appreciating something. Because the Alter Rebbe wants to show that it combines. Well, your effort combines together. Basically, he's bringing both things he said at the end of chapter 15. It combines together with the Ava Misuteres that we naturally have. So in other words, we have the effort of our contemplation and the emotion as much as we can create to appreciate godliness. Now, we also have the natural, we've also awoken in the process. The natural love, which makes sense. Because since you already have natural love, it's not just coming, think of it like a child has natural love to the parents. But you don't feel it. You've now contemplated it and you feel it to some extent. So now it's awakened the dormant love. So that's why you can elevate to Yetzirah, the world of emotions. It's not just behavioral elam asiyah. And then comes the Eibishter and adds the thing with the mitzarfa l'maisa and elevates it from Yetzirah to Bria. So here you have another element of dimension that really brings it up to the level, even a level like as if you had a full passion. But here you need the Eibishter's help in doing that. As will be explained later on at length, and that's in Perokim Lamed Ches, Lamed Tes, Mem Daled. Especially 38, 39, and Mem Daled, and 44. That's how he explains it. And with that he concludes this Perek Tazayin. So what we have here is an additional elements that add to the picture of what is being achieved through our work, what's being achieved through our natural love, what's being achieved when you have the full-blown love, and what's being achieved when you don't have the full-blown, but the Eibishter adds and compensates for it. We also have the so-called the map, which dimension that reaches. Dimension here, the difference between Bria and Yetzirah. So Bria Bizgalas Libe is Bria Mamish. For those that can't reach that, the Talumas Libe that reach only Yetzirah, the Eibishter Mitzarfa and brings it there. But even Balavoch, you still have what you have Yetzirah, which is a big achievement. It's higher than Asiyah. That's why it's called Avodah. Asiyah alone would be like Loy Avodah. It's more behavioral. First nature, second nature. And with that, he concludes chapter 16 in Tanya. And here's where we'll stop. And TanyaApplied.com, you can find this and all the previous programs. Everyone have a good tavach. Again, only Shalom in Eretz Yisrael. And peace for Eden everywhere. We should be zeicher finally to the Gula Amitis Vashlem.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.